Hello and welcome back to Try Your Hand. Today we will be making this cool watercolor pet painting. For the supplies, you will need the following: a watercolor palette, some watercolor paper, a picture of your pet, preferably a large one out of computer paper is fine, some carbon paper, a black marker of some kind, a watercolor brush, a big fluffy one is preferable, and a pencil. You will also need some masking tape. Another thing you'll need is salt. And then things that you'll probably have to provide for yourself are something to clean up the salt, a cup of water, and then I don't show it here, but some sort of craft knife is needed. So the first step of this project is to trace our pet onto our watercolor paper. So for this section of the project, we're going to need our watercolor paper, our carbon paper, the picture of our pet, the masking tape, and our pencil. And then we have that on our surface first. Notice that the side that I have up right now is like shiny and black, and the back side is a little lighter and matte. What we want to do is to make sure that that shiny part is touching the watercolor paper, because that is where the carbon is and how it's going to be transferred onto the watercolor paper. We are putting our carbon paper face down, shiny side down, onto our watercolor paper. Then we are putting our picture of our pet on top of the carbon paper. So now I'm going to use some of that masking tape to just kind of tape the edges of my picture to the table and to the watercolor paper as well, so that nothing moves around on me while I'm tracing. Now that everything is secure, we can now get started on tracing our pet. So what we want to do is just make sure that we are tracing the outline, as well as any distinguishing feature that you want to add to your painting. So when you're doing your tracing, just make sure to put a little bit more pressure than normal onto your pencil as you're tracing, just so that you get a nice clear line from your carbon paper. Things you probably don't want to forget when you're tracing is you want to remember to trace the nose of your pet and the eyes as well. I also traced like the collar and some of her little scruffiness, just because that for me is one of her distinguishing features. It's one of the things that's important about her. That and also her little black eyebrows. So when you think you're done tracing, you can take the carbon paper and the picture off of your painting and check it. Here, for example, you see that I kind of missed some of the features that I wanted to add, like the collar. So I just made sure not to fully take the tracing paper off of my watercolor paper. That way I can just easily put it back down and then finish up any of the things that I missed. Alright, so when you're done, you can just take off the picture and the carbon paper off of your surface and off of your watercolor paper. You can essentially just throw away the carbon paper if you don't need it anymore. Because we are going to be painting the actual pet as well, not just the background, I just taped over the extra masking tape and then use that as my reference for my painting later. So now that we are done with our tracing, what we need to do is to protect that tracing from our watercolor background. To do this, we're going to take our masking tape and then cover the entire part of the paper that has any part of our drawing on it. So I'm just doing this, I'm just cutting off little pieces and just putting it down, making sure that it's smooth. And I just want to make sure that I'm covering every little bit of my tracing. So now that I have put all my tape down, I have to take off any of the excess tape that is on my paper. I'm doing this with a craft knife or an X-Acto knife. I'm just going to very, very lightly go over the tracing lines over the tape. So again, I'm doing this very, very lightly because you don't want to cut through your watercolor paper. You just want to cut through the tape. So you just go very lightly, tracing around, and then you'll peel up the tape. It is a little bit harder where the tape is overlapping, and in those parts you might have to press a little bit harder, but you really don't need to press all that hard with the knife in order to get those clean lines. So now we get to paint the background. That is step 3. So for the background, really you can do any combination of colors that you want. I wanted to put as many as I could onto the background of my paper, so I decided to do like a rainbow kind of thing. So for this part, you'll need obviously your palette, you'll need some water, potentially a paper towel, and you'll need your brush as well. And the salt. That part's also important. So before you use your palette, you want to make sure that your palette is wet. So you'll need to take some water and then just put that on the colors that you are going to use. So now to start with the actual painting part, what we'll do is we'll dip our brush in water and really load that up with water. Then we're dipping our brush into the paint, and then we are putting that onto our piece of paper. We're just kind of brushing it on in any which way we want. We're kind of being a little bit messy with it, which is going to be okay. So you're going to just do this in like sections. You don't want to do too much at once because you want the paper and the paint to be a little bit wet when you pour the salt onto your paper. As you'll see, the salt makes this cool like effect with the water and the paint, which is why we're doing it, because it looks kind of cool. So you'll do your painting in sections, painting little blotches of colors here and there, and then you're putting salt on top of the wet paint. So you're just going to do this all around the entire painting. So when you're done painting your background, we will now have to get it to dry. You can do this by either setting it off to the side and just letting time do the work, or if you have a hair dryer, you can speed it up by blowing it with the hair dryer and drying it that way. That way is in fact the fastest way if you are impatient. Then we can get ready for the next section of our project. Once the painting is dry, we now have to take the salt off of our painting. So as you can see, the salt has kind of like hardened onto the paper a little bit. All you really need to do to take it off is just to rub it with your finger and then get it off the page. So I just kind of rubbed the whole painting to make sure that the salt got off. Then I collected the salt that came off of my paper and threw that in the garbage. I used mostly just my fingers, but I also used a brush to help me like corral the salt. So just keep doing that until the painting is free of salt. The first thing that you need to do to start painting your pet is to take the masking tape off of the tracing that you did previously. So this you do just by peeling off the tape. It should come off pretty easily, but just go slow if you start seeing that it's tearing the paper a little bit. I didn't have any problems with this paper, but better be safe than sorry. So to paint the tracing that you have on your paper, you can really do this any way that you want to do it. So you could either do it like more realistically, or you could just use like random colors as well. I decided for my painting that I was going to try and do something a little bit more realistic. So I started with some of the lighter colors first and then moved on to some of the darker colors. Of course, as you can see here, my dog is kind of like this reddish brown color. So the first thing that I did was use a very light wash of yellow all over the tracing of my dog. And from there, I would move on to different colors. In between each of the different layers of paint, I would use a blow dryer to dry it so that I can put new color on top without the paper getting kind of like gross looking. So when you're painting, one thing to keep in mind with watercolor is that you always want to start with the lightest color possible and then move on to your darker colors, because with watercolor, you can't really paint on top of other watercolor to make it lighter. You can only really ever make it more dark. So that's why I did the yellow first to kind of do like her like chest and kind of like feet areas. And now to paint her, like that reddish fur that I was talking about before, I used some orange in the areas where she is a little bit more orange. Of course, it's going to look a little crazy right now, but later it starts to look a little bit better. Though I will say that this version of this painting that I did was not as good as another version of this painting that I did previously, which I will show you at the end. So another tip is to use blue for your shadows. As you can see in my picture here, the back end of her body and the right side of her face are in shadow. So I use a little bit of blue in those areas to make those shadows. If I use something like black, it would be a little bit too dark and look kind of muddy. So now that the painting is looking pretty crazy, we're going to start making it look a little bit more normal. So again, while my dog has this reddish tinge to her hair, she's not orange, right? So I took then some brown to tone down that orange and put it all over where she has a lot of those like reddish color, where she has that reddish color. And that really did help tone down the painting and make it not look quite so crazy. All right, so the last real place that I need to like paint on her is the black spots on her face. So that would be like her muzzle, the bits on her eyebrows and around her eyes. I will say a mistake I made here was that I kind of went a little bit overboard and kept trying to like make it look nicer, and by doing so, I kind of messed it up a little bit. Know that if it looks kind of weird and crazy, it's okay because we are going to define a lot of the lines after we're done painting. So the less you do, the less you mess with the paper, sometimes that looks a little bit better. So with the last bit of this painting, all you need to do is outline your pet. So I took the black marker in the kit and I traced out all of the outline of my dog, and also did a lot of like the little fine details. This pen in the kit is double-sided. It's got a brush tip and a thin tip on the other side. You can use whatever side you feel like using. I used the brush tip because I wanted darker lines. You don't have to if you don't want to. I also did some of like the little hairs because she's so scruffy, because I felt like that was kind of like a defining feature of my dog. So if you feel as if you need a little bit more color to your pet, you can paint a little bit over this, but don't do too much because I've had some of, like this marker kind of runs a little bit. So don't put too much water on your brush if you are going to go over it with watercolor again. So once you've completed the outline, you are now done. This is the painting I was telling you about earlier that I did previously that I like much better. I think the reason that one turned out better is because I didn't overwork the painting like I did in the one in the video. But that's why I gave you 2 pieces of paper, so that if you mess up on one, you can try again with the second one. So these are other examples of different paintings that I did. So if you don't want to do, for example, rainbow colors, you only want to do like a couple of colors for the background, you can. And also if you only want to do like the face of your pet or just like another small section of the whole picture that you have, that's okay too. It's really whatever you want to make it. In any case, I hope you guys had fun with this project, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.